it's kind of a weird mix. One thing I will say from being a family member, one of the toughest things to do is really remember that head injury involves the whole family, it involves friends, and it doesn't end. And I think you can have the absolute best family, and it can tear families apart, it can bring them closer together, and so that's just important for, I think, all of us to remember, because it's really, really stressful, and people now have this different person in their home, and they're not always sure what to do with them. So that's some of my background, and what I kind of wanted to do today, I talked to Allison some and thought, really, what's useful for you guys? We could talk theory all day, and you'd be like, well, that wasn't really helpful, or something a little bit more practical. So what I've done is I've basically given you all my notes. So you can take notes, you can think, okay, I want to write a question and ask her later, or you can just take a look at this and stash it in your file, and then 6 months when you need it, you're like, wait a minute, she talked about that, let me pull that out. So I really try to keep it functional. We've got an overview of just kind of what the brain, talk about diagnosing a head injury. You have to have one of the following three, either loss of consciousness, you don't remember the event, or they look at the Glasgow Coma Scale, which is, it looks at how severe the coma is, has to do with a lot with duration of coma. And so I don't know how many people you met with head injury. I've met a fair amount. Like I know with my father, he doesn't remember 6 weeks to 2 months, has no recognition of it. And I said, when did you start remembering? Because I just woke up one day and I was in the hospital, and this was the second hospital he was in. So people don't remember, they won't remember, and it's actually very stressful for a lot of people too. And so the people that I've worked with, I always tell them, do you really want to remember? They're like, no, I probably would never get back in a car. I said, okay, well then let's move on. And I think that's something we have to realize too, when someone is missing a piece of time, that we also need to deal with that. Because I think a lot of times people get stuck on that fact, and they need to move forward and kind of get, okay, the accident's done, I don't remember it, I'm not going to, let's move on. So again, kind of some of the prognostic indicators, the duration of coma. That's where the Glasgow Coma Scale, they're going to take a look at how long the post-traumatic amnesia is. Like I said, my father doesn't remember 6 weeks. Given what I heard from all the speech pathologists I've talked to, that he's actually doing really well given the severity of his accident. But they look at that because someone is just out for a much longer period of time. It's usually a much more severe injury. Concussion's a good one. It happens in sports all the time. And apparently, for sports other than just like pickup sports, if a person has a concussion, depending on how long they're out, is supposed to indicate how long they're not supposed to go back on the field. But I think there's a problem with, does the kid really tell them, I want to go play, I'm fine. No, I remember everything. And so that's supposed to happen. I don't know how much it does from the coach's perspective, but I can see where that would be an issue as far as kids not telling. But concussions are a problem. You may or may not have a loss of consciousness, but it's a head injury. Your brain's bouncing around in your skull. It's not supposed to be doing that. So I kind of put a note down there. Okay, you got to remember your brain's kind of squishy. An example of it is Jell-O. It floats in some liquid, and there's a hard, bumpy case around it. So it's not the best setup when your head's getting bounced around. The inside of your skull is kind of rough, and so you're hitting rough surface when your head's moving because of any kind of trauma or injury. So the next thing I want to talk about, I'm going to talk about comes and hits you with a bat. Obviously, the injury is going to be a whole lot worse. And professionally, when someone's tired, those behaviors are definitely exacerbated too. Definitely, it's all about me. I'm focused on me. I'm upset. Somebody, I don't know, took something of mine, and it just gets blown out of proportion, and they get really stuck on it. So yeah, like I said, when I saw this, I'm like, wow, you guys are really going to have some more challenges come up, because how do you break these apart, and how do you treat them, as effectively as possible? So like I said, I've just got a list up here. They're missing the meaning to things. I mean, you see all the social problems, the problems in school, just the problems getting a job, like going through a job interview, all these basic things that we take for granted that need to happen in life. And also, I also put down there in the last point, their arousal is reduced, they have poorer attention, they might not be so responsive to social cues, environmental stimuli. People might think they're just being lazy, or they're just being stubborn. And I've seen this, and you're like, no, that's really not the issue here. But it's also hard because these are behaviors we see in people that don't have head injuries, that don't have other issues, that people accept them and say, well, it's not, that's just an excuse, but it's really not.
And the fatigue, I guess what I would see.
I have neglect. Say, I'm over here. just to bring their attention over there and really try to get them to look at a whole field of space. And that's different than a field cut, which is actually, I don't understand those as well, but basically there's something going on in their brain where they don't see it. There's part of their vision that is actually missing. And I think that can get better. It doesn't always get better, but that's a little bit different than neglect.
You have somebody coming in right now, I don't remember who's getting this young man, but he has vision issues, he has motor issues, he has cognitive issues. Yeah, and so I think like that'll be just being aware that there's like a vision thing going on or something. And I think they even use those words, like the field thing.
There's a field cut and neglect. And I think a doctor can actually diagnose the field cut. That's, I don't think that's actually something we can do, but I've seen like neglect. I've written reports, some mild left neglect or some severe left neglect. You can tell, you'll see somebody, watch them walk down a hall. Are we doing this all the time? Do they even notice there's a wall there? Or, somebody could be standing there talking to them and they have no idea if it's severe enough. There'll be somebody right there.
Would the hearing be compromised?
But, there's so many different ways that vision plays into it, different components to visual deficits. And I can see where that would be a problem in school. What about drawing letters? If someone can't read anymore because they don't understand the representations of those letters, it can be a visual component as well. So that's kind of with vision. I put down a lot of information there. I'll let you all read it. Emotion, I think you guys, we've already talked about that a little bit. You can have problems managing your own emotions as well as understanding, when somebody's really sad, if they came up to you and said, my mother just passed away, I'm really sad, and the person with the head injury said, oh, how you doing, and it's like way off, causes really major social problems, and, it can cause problems at work again, in personal situations, and it happens. I've seen people with head injuries, they go from adults to teenagers, and they totally relate to situations. They get so excited about stuff. As an adult, we're like, that is really great. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. That's absolutely wonderful. And you're like, way too much emotion. Someone that has autism does not understand intonations, totally misses out on a lot of the pragmatics of conversations, and you see a lot of that with head injury. I was telling Allison I had a clinical rotation in outpatient where I had a patient with a head injury who was an adult who fell off a ladder, and a child with just some pragmatic issues and language issues. And I would see both of them, and I'm like, there is something going on that's the same. So the question is, if I do this over here and it works, what can I do it over here? Or if I do this over here?
Inappropriate emotionally because of head injury. Mm-hmm. And what do you say?
Well,
what do we do?
I think it's one of those things where, I like to do. And I remember that with this one child that I'm thinking of, we did some other things where I let him be the therapist for a while. And he had to monitor what I was doing and tell me what was right and what was wrong. So sometimes I think also it's kind of nice for maybe a patient who's not really in control, but everybody else is. It turns the table, it lets them be in charge for a little while. And I actually found it worked really well. And we were working on some task. It wasn't an emotion task, but that he had to figure out what I was making mistakes on, and it was very effective because I think they're looking at it from a different perspective. It's like, let me try to, okay, here, I'm going to set it up. You are now the therapist, and I am your patient. So this is what we need to do. And you could even give them like a graphical box of, I was too loud, I was too quiet, I got mad, and see if they can monitor you and see if you kind of turn the tables. I've tried it a little bit, and it's worked pretty well. I've seen, like with head injury, if somebody gets really upset, you're like, okay, we need to take a break, and this is why. Then even evaluate it with them. Do you know why we had to stop? Really, it's that reinforcement over and over again. This is not okay. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I know from personal experience, my mom would tell me my father was getting better. My father would get really upset. He's normally a pretty calm man, and she'd say, well, you can't talk to me that way. That's not okay. And it took him a long time, but I think it probably took 6 months or a year, and it got better. And he learned how to control his emotions more. And I think that's a lot of it is, we have these checks and balances, and they're really out of whack after a head injury. And it's like you have to teach somebody how to control these things because they don't know how to do it anymore.
So would you kind of do that like with the autistic kids, I guess, where they won't necessarily internalize when you meet somebody to look at them in the eye and smile, but you can teach them that, so
Yeah.
it just becomes sort of a
it's like a procedure.
Right.
Yeah,
If
your teacher.
somebody says something that should be funny, I should smile.
Yeah.
So it would sort of be the same thing.
Yeah, but I think I think with the, I don't know a lot about autism, so I'll start quantify it with that. But the little bit that I do know, I think with head injury, there's probably a little bit more awareness. I think training's probably more effective of actually, instead of just like with autism, you're like, okay, here's what you're supposed to do in situation A and situation B. Whereas I think at head injury, as you work on it, and hopefully as someone gets better, they have a little bit more control over that. It's not necessarily just someone told me to do this.
Because they might remember it as
Yeah.
sort of the older.
Yeah. And it's a mob scene. That's what a lot of people with head injury, that's what a lot of their world is like. It's tiring. That's why going to a big party that might have been fun in the past or listening to music is too much. It might give them headaches.
Which has a lot in common with extreme autism.
Yeah, it's stimulation coming in and no filter. I mean,
And
think.
extreme ADHD.
Yeah, I mean, and it's something to remember. Their world is so tiring because all this stuff that doesn't bother us, that we don't think about, they're getting it all in, and they're having to try to process it. So not only do they have a head injury where the brain's not working as well, they're dealing with more. And it's exhausting. And you'll see somebody with a head injury, a lot of times when they get tired, you'll see them slur. They might be more irrational. They might get upset a lot more quickly. Their judgment may just go out the window because they're so tired. And I think right after the injury for a while, you'll see somebody with a head injury sleep a lot because it takes a lot of energy to heal your brain. Well, even after that, like you've talked about, I can't go out and party and get up for that 7 a.m. class. I'm too tired.
Because she got up and went and had no memory of the whole day.
Yeah, it's just too much. Their plateau, their tolerance level is so much lower than what we deal with. It's like when you're really busy and maybe you have somebody that's sick in the family and you've got a really busy day at work and you've got a party to plan, you're just tired. And that's a lot of times, that's a lot more the time what it's like for someone with a head injury. So just external factors you don't think about that I think family forgets. Family wants them to jump back in and be the person again, and they can't manage everything. So I think that's another